Hello, everyone. I'm glad to see so many of you attending here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rabbi Margie Sella, and I am the Educational Programming Coordinator for Women's League. And I am very happy and excited to welcome you to this first installment of our program, Sichot ben Achayot, Conversations Between Sisters. And these will be conversations taking place between conservative women of the diaspora and our Masorti sisters in Israel. So many months of planning have gone into this program, and I believe we have on the call today, I think we've already seen, we have many people from the United States, from Canada, from Israel, from South America, and I believe we also had one registered from Australia. So we really have representation from all around the world. Very exciting. Many months went into planning this program, and I would especially like to thank the members of my committee who spent so much time putting this all together. And those people are Diane Friedgut in Israel, Ellie Kremer in the United States, and Rabbi Ellen Mullins-Fields in the United States. And I also would like to thank the educational co-chairs of Women's League. That would be Ellen Bresnick and Julia Loeb for their input along the way as well. So before we get to the program, and I introduce today's speakers, I would like to begin by calling upon the International President of Women's League, Debbie Kaner-Goldich, for some words of welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi Margie. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our Women's League sisters in the United States, Canada, and Israel, and a special welcome to our Masorti sisters in South America. And if that person is on from Australia, we welcome you also. I am Debbie Kaner-Goldich, President of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. So an important part of Women's League's mission is to support Israel and the Masorti movement there. Women's League has created relationships with Kehilot and the women within the Masorti movement in Israel. And today's program emphasizes that relationship. I would like to introduce Diane Friedgut. Maybe we could spotlight her. And Diane is the Women's League liaison in Israel. And we appreciate all of your support and help, Diane. I would also like to introduce Ellie Kremer, who is our volunteer International Israel Chair, who works very closely with Diane and has had input in today's program. Thank you, Ellie, for all you do. And now I would like to introduce the Executive Director of Women's League for Conservative Judaism, Rabbi Ellen Mullins-Fields. Rabbi.
Thank you, Debbie. Shavua Tov to everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people here with us across many time zones. It's really amazing. As we said, many months have gone into this program. Just as a little short background to the program, we don't often or always get the opportunity to have a grant. And I remember when we got the application that there was going to be a grant from Karen Kayemet L'Yisrael, JNF, Masorti Olami, and Merkaz Olami, to create an educational program to teach our women in North America about Israel, to create relationships with Israel, to add to our understanding of what goes on in Israel. Debbie and I looked at each other and said, we need someone to help us write this grant because we really want this program to be amazing and to also just really educate our women. So that is when we brought on Rabbi Margie Sella as our part-time educational programming coordinator, who sat for hours trying to figure out how best we could use this grant to educate us and to create relationships. Each of the regions, our 13 regions in Women's League, have a partnership with Kehilot in Israel. We know that we have an amazing Masorti Women's Day of Study with Diane Friedgut that she plans, and because of COVID, the last 2 years or year and a half, we've been able to participate virtually in that because we can't be together. And this was an opportunity to enhance those relationships that are created during the Masorti Days of Study, and also create relationships with our women in the Kehilot. And we did it now at 1 o'clock in the afternoon here because at night, hopefully in Israel with the time difference, we can be together. And each of our programs really have a complete focus to really understand the similarities and the differences between our women here in Northern America and our Masorti community, specifically in Israel. And it's just a wonderful opportunity. I know at the beginning, we were all talking about the great places to eat at the bus station and how we all want to be there. Many of us have children there just temporarily. Some have made Aliyah, but God willing, all of us can go visit soon. And through this program, we could really visit all of you and see each other. So thank you very much to my colleague, Rabbi Sella, for creating this wonderful opportunity today. And Shavua Tov to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Rabbi Ellen Mullins-Fields, for those wonderful words of welcome. So now let's get to the heart of the matter. Let us get to today's program. Our topic for today is conservative Masorti conversion. Our two speakers today will explore the process of conversion, the motivations that lead people to choose to convert within our movement, and the ramifications of that decision for the convert and their children and grandchildren, as well as where those issues may differ between Israel and the diaspora. Each will give a brief introduction addressing the topic, and following that, they will enter into dialogue with each other. Following their discussion, at the end of the program, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. So the chat is open only so that you can enter questions. The only people who will be able to see the chat from this point on is Rabbi Mullins-Fields and myself. But as the speakers are speaking, if you have a question, feel free to enter it into the chat, and we will look at all of the questions, and we will bring those up at the end when we get to the Q&A part of the program. So our first speaker today is Rabbi Elana Zelony from Richardson, Texas. And Rabbi Zelony has been the senior rabbi for Congregation Beth Torah in Richardson, which is near Dallas, Texas, since 2014. She is the first female rabbi in the conservative movement to lead a synagogue in the state of Texas. Quite an accomplishment. Her rabbinate emphasizes pluralism, inclusion, interfaith work, spirituality, and involvement with the community. She is a member of both the Richardson Interfaith Alliance and Rabbis Without Borders. She previously served as the director of congregational learning at Congregation Beth Shalom in San Francisco, and was an assistant rabbi at Shearith Israel in Atlanta, where she worked with the faith advisory team of the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Rabbi Zelony received her ordination from the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in 2009. She holds a master's degree from American Jewish University's Graduate Center for Jewish Education. Together with her husband, Adiv, Rabbi Zelony has two children, Nessia and Magen. Rabbi Zelony.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Rabbi Sella. I apologize that there is no video. It isn't an issue of toggling the icon at the bottom of the screen. It really isn't working. And I do not seem to be able to troubleshoot it without rebooting Zoom. I know you'd like me to start my video. We'll try it that way. It's just broken, and I don't want to log out of Zoom to maybe not be able to log back in. So my apologies that you can't see me as I speak. And my gratitude. I am thrilled to be speaking in this international community of Jewish women. There may be someone on the call who is not familiar with the concept of conversion in Judaism at all. So I'm going to start with the basics. Jewish conversion is ritualized. There are 2 parts for women and 3 parts for men. There is a ritual and a back and forth with something called the beyn. In some communities, you appear before 3 rabbis. In other communities, you appear before wise and observant and active, caring elders in the community who serve on the beyn. And they will ask the conversion candidate questions about why he, she, or they wish to become Jewish. That's part 1 of conversion. Part 2 is immersing in the mikveh, which are ritual waters. And we'll talk about mikvahs in a little bit. And then if the conversion candidate is male, if they are uncircumcised, they need to undergo circumcision before completing conversion. If they are already circumcised, then they need to go under the ritual of hatafat dam brit, which is taking a ceremonial drop of blood from the penis. So that's the formal process. Now I'll get to the questions I've been asked to cover. What expectations do I make for prospective converts, and what do I include in my curriculum? I don't take candidates before the Beit Din and into the mikveh until they've undergone a course of study and at least a year of participating actively in the Jewish community, whether that means attending services or being involved in our volunteer work or our social interactions, because I believe you can't be Jewish in isolation. In our community, we have a one-year class that's run by the 3 conservative synagogues in Dallas, and all the rabbis participate in the teaching of that class. We cover the holiday cycle, life cycle events, anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, Zionism, Israel, Shabbat, Kashrut, the different denominations of Judaism, and the different Jewish communities that live around the globe. We were also asked to answer, do you explain to prospective converts that their conversion may not be recognized by non-liberal Jews or the Israeli rabbinate? And I do disclose that information. I think this is a life-changing experience for people, and they need to have the maximum amount of information possible in order to make a decision that is right for them. But what I say is, Masorti Judaism, conservative Judaism, is not a lesser form of Judaism. It is its own unique, authentic Jewish practice. And when we study the theology and philosophy of conservative Judaism, that feels true to you, then this is the right movement for you. It can be a challenge in some American communities to get an appointment at a mikveh. We are fortunate in Dallas. There is an Orthodox synagogue that has a mikveh that lets the Reform and conservative communities use the mikveh for conversion purposes. And the community has taken a supportive role in the financing of that mikveh. So it is a mutually beneficial relationship that has worked out very well. There is some, they are getting a new rabbi, and they are looking for a rabbi who is more traditional than their previous rabbi at the synagogue that contains the mikveh. So the future of being able to use the mikveh for conversion in Dallas is uncertain. Our other option, of course, would be to use natural bodies of water. We are not near an ocean, and the river, the Trinity River, is really not someplace you would want to immerse in. So we will have to figure that out if things change. There are communities in the United States that put their mikvahs in Jewish community centers, or they have a separate mikvah organization that is a community mikvah, but that's not our case in Dallas. One question that we received was, how often do potential male converts need to be circumcised as opposed to hatafat dam brit, taking the ceremonial drop of blood? It's a changing game. There is a growing movement in the United States that is against the circumcision of babies. And so it's becoming less common for American males to be circumcised. When I'm working with older adults, people who are 20 years or older, it would be unusual if they weren't already circumcised. Usually we can do hatafat dam brit, but as I'm working with families that have children, it is becoming more of an issue. Are conservative and Masorti conversions done in North America recognized in Israel? Yes, and they are recognized for the purpose of immigration to Israel. They are not recognized by the rabbinate in Israel. So this can become a complex issue because if someone undergoes conversion with me supervising, they can move to Israel, but should they meet someone in Israel and wish to get married, they will have to undergo another conversion with the Israeli Rabbanut in order to qualify. At least that's my understanding, but I know that Diana will speak a little bit more about that and more knowledgeably. And finally, what does it matter to us which conversions are recognized? There would be a logic and a justification in saying, you know what, we are authentic Jews and we do not need the Orthodox community to include us or consider us legitimate. The challenge with that is it does not make us a united community. And the follow-up question was, what can we do about it? We can continue to be open to conversation and communicate with those that do not consider our conversions illegitimate. There's no point in closing doors if we can keep them open, but it is not an easy issue to solve. So with that, I'll turn it over to Diana.
Thank you, Rabbi Zelony. Let me, before Diana begins, let me introduce to you Rabbi Diana Villa, who is speaking to us today from Jerusalem. Rabbi Villa, a native of Argentina, holds degrees in Jewish and general philosophy, psychology, and Talmud from the Hebrew University, JTS, and Buenos Aires University. She was ordained in 2000 at the Schechter Rabbinical School in Jerusalem, and is currently a doctoral candidate at Bar-Ilan University. She previously lectured at the Seminario Rabbinico Latino Americano in Buenos Aires, and currently lectures on Talmud and Jewish law at the Schechter Institute and the Schechter Rabbinical School. Rabbi Villa is a member of the steering committee and the Committee on Jewish Law of the Rabbinical Assembly in Israel. She has been a staff member in national and regional women's study days, organized by Women's League for Conservative Judaism in Israel, together with the Schechter Institute and the Masorti movement for the past 21 years. Besides teaching in the conversion issue, she is the only conservative member of the board of directors of Nativ, the National Center for Jewish Studies, Identity and Conversion in Israel, a subsidiary of the Jewish agency in charge of official conversions for civilians and soldiers. Rabbi Villa. No, you have to unmute.
Okay. I'm unmuted. Okay, so I want to expand and talk a little bit about some of the issues that Elana also spoke about. One of the issues that I, as somebody who teaches Jewish law and always refer to the halakhic aspects of conversions, is talking a little bit more about the third element of the conversion process. Elana mentioned that there is circumcision and immersion, and then the third one is accepting the commandments. Accepting the commandments is the only one of the three elements which is not 100% clear what it refers to. There's only one proper way to circumcise. There's only one proper way to go to a mikvah, which is a kosher mikvah. But what does it mean to accept the commandments? If you look at classical Jewish law, all the way from the Talmud to our days, you'll see that this definition changed. In the Talmud, you see that it's basically letting people know about laws that have to do with our fellow men, much less with ritual laws, and basically letting people know and understanding that there is a recompense and punishment for doing this or for not doing this, but there isn't this perspective that we see very often in our days, that you have to be careful about every little detail, and you will be checked to see what school and what environment you are and your children are. There's nothing of that in the Talmudic sources, and all through the Middle Ages and up to the Shulchan Aruch, the main code of Jewish law in the 16th century. We see that basically is teaching people what some of the basic Jewish laws are, and very often the ethical aspects of Jewish law, and much less the ritualistic aspects. So if we look at the Talmudic sources, the main source in the tractate Yebamot talks specifically about how to help the poor and that kind of issues. And there's only one source in the Talmud that talks about having to observe even the most minute details of rabbinic law. And actually that one source, which is about 2 lines long, was not codified. It does not appear in the codes of law, because they all ruled on the basis of a process of studying, of having a general outlook of what Judaism is all about, and a process that continues even after conversion. And one of the very important aspects that the Talmud talks about is that once the process is completed, there is no way back. A person, even if they go back to their old beliefs or to another religion that they observed in the past, is still a Jew. He may be an apostate Jew, but the phrase in the Talmud is that their marriage that they are involved in, if the man married a woman while he was a convert, it's a valid marriage, even if he went back to his old ways. There is no way to go back on a conversion. So it's a really process that somebody has to take very seriously to reach this point. I remember I once got a question. We had questions and answers on Jewish law at the Schechter website. Somebody wrote me, I had an Orthodox conversion and I had a conservative conversion. It was the mistake of my life. What do I do? I said, you can do whatever you want, but as far as we are concerned, you are still Jewish, whether you go back to your old ways or not. And another important thing that I wanted to mention was that in the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the organization where all conservative rabbis belong to, rabbis who are do not observe strictly some law or another can be notified that this is not okay, can have all kinds of sanctions, etc. But there are only 3 things for which they can be expelled summarily from the organization. And one of them is performing a conversion without these 3 elements, which are circumcision for males and immersion, and finally appearing before a rabbinic court and assuming the law as part of their Jewish identity. An interesting aspect that was added by Maimonides in the Middle Ages was that he says it's important, and even more important than the law itself to a certain degree, to see that the prospective convert believes in God and has left aside his old religion. I mean, if after the fact it turns out that the person lied to us and it wasn't so, there's nothing we can do about it because the conversion is final. But the rabbis who convert them have to make every effort to make sure that this person is really part of the Jewish faith, not only going to be observing certain practical aspects, but that he has left behind, she or he has left behind all of their old beliefs that they had if they belong to another religion in the past. And this is very important because we define ourselves as a halachic movement, and therefore even though there can be different interpretations of what it means to accept the law, there has to be some level of acceptance that this is part of the identity of our identity as Jews. Now, one of the aspects that we're going to discuss more later, but it's really very central here, is there's a very big difference in conversion in Israel or conversion in the diaspora. Because in the diaspora, the whole environment is a non-Jewish environment. In Israel, we don't have necessarily a religious environment, but the calendar is a Jewish calendar, and the language is the Hebrew language. And even children who go to a secular school have to learn about the Jewish tradition and Jewish history and have some knowledge of what the Bible is about. And therefore, people who we convert here are usually, they identify as Jews, but are not halachically Jews, not Jews according to Jewish law. The law of return allows to apply for citizenship, for immigration and citizenship, to anyone who has a parent or a grandparent who is Jewish. So if it's not the mother or the maternal grandmother, the person is not halachically Jewish. If it's the mother's father or the father or one of the father's parents, that doesn't make the person Jewish. That makes the person eligible for the law of return and for citizenship, but they are not halachically Jewish. So this brings about a lot of problems, because even if that person lives within the Jewish community, he or she will run into a lot of problems at different moments in their life. For example, if they want to get married through the rabbinate, they will not be allowed to do so. And this very often feels like an affront to some of these people, because, for example, most of them are Jews from the former Soviet Union or descendants of Jews from the former Soviet Union who suffered terribly because they had a Jewish last name, because their father was Jewish. And here they come to Israel and they're told, no, you're not Jewish because your mother is not Jewish. Or your father is only Jewish on his father's side. So you have a Jewish last name, but you're not really Jewish. So these people have a Jewish identity. That's how the family feels. They don't feel like they belong to another religion or they're not Jewish. And yet they know that throughout their lives, they're going to run into problems. That they want to get married through the rabbinate. Also, eventually, if they want, when they die and they have to be buried, they also have problems. And therefore, many people want to convert just to make life easier for themselves, to ensure also that their children won't run into the same kind of problems that they're running into, to transmit it on to the next generation. Therefore, even people who sometimes come on Aliyah with a conservative or reform conversion, which qualifies them to come on Aliyah and to get Israeli citizenship, sometimes want to have a second conversion with the Orthodox to know that they can be registered as Jewish, not only in the Ministry of Interior, but also as far as the rabbinate is concerned, that neither they nor their children will run into problems in the future. So I really think it's important, like Elana said before, that people know that this is a problem, because this is beyond the ideological question. This is like the practical aspect, because if you ever want to marry somebody who's Orthodox, or you ever want to come to Aliyah, in a certain respect, you're going to run into problems. But of course, as Rabbi Margie mentioned before, I'm a director of the board of Nativ. Nativ started off with a Neman commission, where they wanted to found an institute for conversion in which all the movements would be represented. In practice, it is mostly Orthodox, and they have a kind of lip service that they have a conservative and reform person on the board, and that they teach a little bit about the different movements in their program. But they're a more liberal Orthodox in any case. They know for sure that the vast majority of their converts aren't going to be strictly observant. And they accept this because there are many rabbis from the Orthodox movement that recognize this is a valid situation, that somebody learns all about Judaism and may not necessarily observe every single detail. Some of the former chief rabbis, such as the Rabbi Uziel, the first Sephardi rabbi of Israel, or Rabbi Herzog or Rabbi Goren, were much, much more open-minded than the current Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox chief rabbis in Israel. And they understood that you have to find ways to let all of these people who live here and serve in the army and die for the country be an integral part of society and not discriminate them, even if their mother was not Jewish. So they really tried to make it easier for them. But in the end, these people have to go in front of an ultra-Orthodox beyn, a conversion rabbinical court. And very often they can't get through the questions that they're being asked. One of my students told me that she was told half of the prospective converts can't get through the beyn because of the kind of questions that they're asked. I remember once when I was in the former board of this institution before it became part of the Jewish agency, one of the top rabbis there said that they asked a prospective conversion candidate, "Can you tell us Ashrei by heart?" And even he was like flabbergasted, because all of us who know it by heart never sat down to study it by heart. It's a psalm that one says so many times that in the end, if you've been saying it for years, you may know it by heart. But why is it a requirement that you should know Ashrei by heart in order to be Jewish? It makes absolutely no sense. And like Rabbi Elana said, usually a conversion process lasts for about a year, because people have to learn all about the Jewish calendar throughout the year, and they have to learn about the Jewish life cycle, etc. That somebody who comes from a non-Jewish background and barely knows Hebrew and has to learn about practice and basic beliefs in Jewish history, there's no reason we should expect them to know all kinds of sections of the liturgy by heart, and yet they ask this kind of question. And they usually require an Orthodox family to be in touch with them and to invite them for Shabbat and holidays, and to go to an Orthodox synagogue for services. And sometimes they ask them to put their children in Orthodox schools, even though that is not the way the home is. And that makes it so difficult that I sometimes think it's like a real pity that when all of these immigrants from the former Soviet Union started coming to Israel years ago, and they were more open-minded to the idea of converting, and the rabbinate made it so difficult to convert that many of them never bothered converting, which means that every year they have children and grandchildren who are also not halakhically Jewish because their parents or their grandparents never converted themselves. And it really seems in a way that I don't know how Israel will ever solve this issue, because I was once told that more non-halakhic Jews are born here every year than the amount that they can convert every year. It's just, you can never catch up with it. So at least they're trying in the Nativ program, which is the one that also has the conversion programs for soldiers within the army. They try to make it friendlier and easier, but in the end, you have to go before an ultra-Orthodox beyn, which makes it sort of difficult. So as far as the circumcision or hatafat damrit that Rabbi Elana also spoke about, in Israel, usually there's not a question of the drop of blood that you take ritualistically. Usually children are circumcised, so that's less of a problem. But the issue is, can they get through the beyn, which is really the biggest problem in Israel. Completely opposite what rabbis like Rabbi Uziel said, that if we make it so difficult for them and we check every detail of what they observe or they don't observe, and we don't let them in. We're just closing the door to all the converts. And he thought that this was like in the 50s, 1950s. He thought this was not correct. And today the problem is much worse than it was in the 1950s. Okay, and yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention that one concept that's very much used in Israel is what's called Zera Israel, the descendants or the seed of Israel. That's how we call all of these people who identify as Jews but are not halachically Jewish, who have a father or a grandparent who is Jewish, and that is really the population that we refer to in Israel when we talk about conversion.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Villa. So now we're going to get to the dialogue part of the program. So if we, and I understand Rabbi Zelony has her camera working again. So if we could have Rabbi Zelony, and there we are. Okay, so now let's move into the dialogue part of the program, so that maybe you can go into comparing some of these questions, the differences between Israel and the diaspora.
Yes. Well, why don't we start?
Back.
I'm back. It's good to see you. Well, why don't we start with mikveh? Because I know when we were preparing, you let me know it's not so easy to use the mikveh in Israel either. So how about you share what that experience is like?
Okay, the problem is, even though there are mikvahs all over the country, obviously, they are run by the ultra-Orthodox, and they usually make it very difficult to use it for conservative conversion. So we have one mikvah that is easy, which is in Kibbutz Hanaton, which is a Masorti, has a Masorti synagogue, and the mikveh can be used openly. And the community of Omer in the south near Beersheba very often lets the conservative conversions take place using the mikveh there. But other than that, there is almost no mikveh that can be used. And in the past, they used to sometimes go to the ocean or to all kinds of other natural places, and they don't do that much anymore. So it's really, really difficult, even though we're in a Jewish state which is full of mikvahot, which are paid by the taxpayers.
And in the United States, it also really depends where you live. There are 3 mikvahs in Dallas, but there are a lot of smaller Jewish communities across the South and the Midwest, and they are nowhere near a mikveh. So for example, in Shreveport, Louisiana, I have a colleague who graduated a few years behind me, and she will take her candidates as a group and bring them to Dallas. It's a 3-hour drive. They'll make a day of it. And we will do several families all at once because she needs the beyn here in Dallas, and she needs the mikveh here in Dallas. What else was on our list, Rabbi Sela? Will you help prompt us?
Well, I think we also were talking about the differences. What are the motivations that inspire someone to seek a conversion, or B, specifically a conservative conversion? I mean, many people think that the main reason is for the sake of marriage, and I think we have found, many of us as rabbis, that is not necessarily the case. So what are the motivations that bring people to us?
Via, do you want to go first?
I really think that it's still, in many cases, it is for the sake of marriage. It's very clear in Nativ that especially the women who know that their children's Jewish identity is determined by the mother, want to convert to avoid problems for their children, because Israelis who are not halakhically Jewish can be active citizens, can do almost anything without being halakhically Jewish, but they know that the problem is going on to the next generation. So I think here it's still a big problem, and having grown up in Argentina, lived there so many years, I know that in Latin America, it's also one of the main issues is conversion for marriage. I'm not saying that all converts are like that, obviously not. Many converts can be really identified with Judaism at a much more profound level, but there's a lot of that, a lot of conversions for the sake of marriage.
And my experience has been different. The majority of people I help through the conversion process, they have always been drawn to Judaism and are finally, as adults, having the opportunity to seek it out. That's the most common scenario. I feel like they already have a Jewish neshama, and we're just formalizing the process for them. But there are also families that are mixed marriages in my congregation. And when mom isn't Jewish, we are a conservative synagogue. So we encourage them to bring their children through the formal conversion process. As infants, if possible. Sometimes this is not an easy decision for the family to make. There may be two faiths being practiced in the house, or there may be someone on the side of the family that isn't Jewish who would find this very upsetting for the children to go through a formal conversion process. So it's not always a baby. Sometimes it takes a little longer for families to be ready to convert. Yeah.
Okay, so as a side question to that one, let me ask the two of you, because it sounds like we're still talking about one partner coming to convert, regardless of what the reason is. How often do you get someone who, just an independent person, comes on their own to seek conversion? And how often do you get a couple or a family coming to seek conversion together?
It's pretty common to get individuals, and I often find they're somewhere in their 20s, that they had been fascinated by Judaism in their childhood, and now that they are adults and independent, are completing the process of joining the Jewish community. I do occasionally get entire families that want to convert. In the South, it's not uncommon for people to find Judaism through Messianic Judaism or Jews for Jesus, where they have been part of the Christian community. They make this transitional step where they join a church that still believes that Jesus is the Messiah, but that is wearing a talit and reading from the Torah and celebrating the Jewish holidays. It's a blend of beliefs. And I mean, one of our families that joined, he rides the train downtown to work every day, and he saw another person from our synagogue on the train wearing a kippah, and he introduced himself, and that was the beginning of his education that Messianic Judaism is not the same thing as mainstream Judaism. And then over the course of a relationship of a few years, the whole family went through a conversion process together. The other thing that is becoming more prevalent in the United States, there are small communities in the South and in the Midwest that are mostly Black or Latino, where the community starts practicing rabbinic Judaism. They have an art scroll siddur, they keep Shabbat and Kashrut. They might actually be more comfortable going through an Orthodox conversion than a Reform or conservative one. They find there are some obstacles, though, when they try to enter the Orthodox community. And there's a lot of tension right now, at least in my experience, because these communities don't necessarily want or understand the need to be recognized by the larger Jewish community. They say, we're practicing Judaism. That's nice that y'all have denominations. We don't really understand why we need to be a part of it to be recognized. And it will be interesting to me as this issue continues, how the Masorti movement can reach out to these communities and invite them in a way that's welcoming. And we'll see. I think there are Jewish communities that we are missing the opportunity to include.
Rabbi Villa?
I don't think that's so much a situation in Israel. It's usually individuals who come and convert. It's also usually relatively small numbers, people who know that it will not be recognized officially. Sometimes it's also an issue of converting minors. The ultra-Orthodox establishment requires the parents to be strictly observant, and that's very often not the case. That's why in Israel there are even unofficial Orthodox conversions, which are also not recognized by the state, that make it easier, because according to Jewish law, converting a minor is very easy, really, because they have to have, of course, circumcision and immersion. But if they reach the age of 12 or 13, when they're bar bat mitzvah, and do not protest, they're just Jewish, and that's the end of the story. So it's so much easier to convert a minor, and yet the rabbinate is always putting obstacles. So sometimes those are also some of the cases of people who come to convert, but I don't think there is such a case of whole communities coming and asking for conversion. It's relatively few people, and usually individuals who come to convert through the movement.
Rabbi Via, I have a question we didn't discuss, but it's occurring to me now. The emotional experience of converting in my community is a very joyful one. Often friends that they've made in the synagogue come with them to the mikvah, and they'll often go out to eat afterwards or have a party. And the first Shabbat after the conversion, we help them put on their talit for the first time. We give them their first aliyah. We serve a cake at the kiddush. What is the emotional experience of conversion when they have to fight so hard against the Rabbanut to become Jewish?
Well, look, first of all, the programs here are usually a program of study with a private tutor. So there are very few courses that have many people studying at once, like they have in some of the communities abroad. So the different teachers have different methods, and they study one-on-one, and they very often can ask them to come to a certain congregation for the year, etc. But it's not the same feeling, like, there's a whole group converting in a congregation, and they have a emotional process of conversion. I think it's very different, and it's also because it's part of your becoming more part of the Israeli society. It has a different meaning. It's maybe more of a social meaning than a religious meaning, actually.
It's like getting your Teudat Zehut, but
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's really quite different.
Thank you. I think one of the other issues we talked about the other day, and you both mentioned it in your introductory remarks, the idea of the Brit Milah and the circumcision. How many Moelim are there in Israel as opposed to here in the United States or elsewhere in the diaspora? How easy or difficult is it to schedule a circumcision for an adult male who comes for conversion?
We have 3 in Dallas. 2 of them are Orthodox trained. One is a rabbi. And then the third is a retired pediatrician who is a Reformed Jew. And all 3 of them are happy to do circumcision or hatafat dam brit for any of the denominations. There are also some who prefer, and I allow, they want the circumcision done in a hospital with a urologist or a pediatrician. I really encourage on the 8th day, but I will go and make the brachot, the blessings, if that makes the family more comfortable than using a traditional mohel.
Well, there used to be one mohel, conservative rabbi, who doesn't do milah anymore. And I asked recently, I was told there is no more conservative mohalim in Israel, at least not practicing ones. So you have to find a liberal Orthodox on the whole who's willing to do so. There are some like that. It's easier for babies, obviously, than it is for converts. But it's really complicated because it's even for the secular society, very often you get the feeling that to be really Jewish, you have to be Orthodox, even if they're not Orthodox themselves, because the model that they're getting as to what legitimate Judaism is Orthodoxy, and the rabbinate is very ultra-Orthodox, and the message is always that if you're not really extreme like that, and you see it even in the discussions in the parliament, then whatever you're doing is really not right. So it's a problem, and I wish we had more conservative mohalim. I'm not very involved in that aspect of it, but I was told that at current time, there isn't a single one who's at least a practicing mohel.
Okay, so I think I'm looking at all these wonderful questions that are coming in from all of our participants. So I want to move to that in just 1 minute. I would like to ask each of you one final question before we move to the Q&A session, and that is this. I gather that both of you have participated, officiated at more than a few conversions. What is the experience like for you as a rabbi to officiate at a conversion?
I always say when I hear them come out of the waters of the mikveh, you are the newest Jew on the planet in this moment. I just feel a tremendous sense of joy when people want to become Jewish. And I feel very honored to be part of the process of their education and their spiritual growth. There are times when it's unpleasant, though. Like, I have arrived to a beyn where a candidate has, even though I've asked the question, finally breaks down and admits they're still practicing Christianity. So not always, right? Not always is it a great moment, but very often it's tremendously joyful and a great privilege to help.
I am much less involved in Batei Din. I really not. I teach conversion. I teach the rabbis, but it's not really what I'm so involved in. So I don't have that much practical experience sitting on a Beit Din. It really depends. There are, of course, people who are very, very connected. And there are also people who are doing it sort of, to do a V, to know that I've gone through this and now I'm more part of Israeli society. There are all kinds of people coming to convert. And there are also, as I said, those who do it basically so that they can go and have a chuppah afterwards.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, so we're going to move to the Q&A part of the session now. So if we can have Rabbi Wallenfields pinned on the screen as well. She's going to be moderating this part of the session.
Hello, thank you very much to both of you. Wonderful presentation, and I'm glad we can now see you, my colleague and friend. So I have a few questions here. Some are comments and some are questions. So I'm going to start with some of the comments first. So Naomi Gretz, it's great to have you on with us. And she had two comments that she wrote that when I taught 2 converts years ago, the women used the Omer mikveh, of course, which is our community. And then they came to our Kehillah on Shabbat and had an aliyah, and we made a kiddush for them. So just wonderful that the minute they become Jewish, they're part of the community. And then she continued and wrote, and the 3 babies that were born after the conversion had their Brit Milah in our synagogue in Omer. So that's pretty fantastic. And I have to tell you, I was screenshotting the questions as we went along just so I wouldn't have to scroll through it. So Tess asked, seems like the social culture meaning in diaspora is more important than the individual. I wonder if the difference between individuality and community can be discussed as impacting the conversion processes.
Yes. One of the difficulties I sometimes have, especially in the United States, where there's so much value placed on the individual's needs and rights, is people are confused about why they need to adhere to all of those Jewish rules. And so that's one of the reasons that I insist not only do they engage in a year of study, but they engage in a year of participation. Because I think it's hard to understand how much being a Jew is part of being a community until you live it. I just think for some people, there's no way to grasp the concept that it really matters that there are 10 people there so someone can say Kaddish, or forget Kaddish, so that we can say Baruch Hu, right? That we're a quorum. So it really can be a challenge to overcome. And I have had candidates walk away and say, you're not the right rabbi to educate me. I want to do this on my own, and I'm not interested in being a part of the broader Jewish community. And that's okay. I hope they find happiness somewhere else.
Rabbi Vila, did you have anything you wanted to add?
It's very different here because there are many less conversions, and the people really do it, I think, to be Israeli, not necessarily to be part of a Jewish community. To be
Interesting.
more, to have a stronger Israeli identity, since this is a majority is Jewish, so you feel you have to get to know your Jewishness better, and you have to have an official Jewish identity.
And that's why we're having this program, so we can see the similarities and the differences.
Yeah.
So just another comment, 2 comments. One was from my mother, actually, Carol Wolins, who said that often after the conversion takes place, the rabbi that she was involved with would remarry the couple. And I've done that also, which is really just incredibly special. Then Janet in, I would assume Wilmette, if it's this mikveh that I know of. She's a volunteer at a conservative mikveh in the Chicago area. And the most interesting conversion she assisted with was an Arab Muslim who was repulsed by what was happening and wanted to be on the right side of the conflict. Just an interesting comment. Okay. So from one of our colleagues who I was very excited to see on, Rabbi Avis Miller, thank you for joining us. She is the former chair of the Rabbinical Assembly Committee on Kiruv and Gior. An honor to have you with us today. And she wrote, would you convert someone whose partner actively practices another religion, thereby creating an intermarriage?
Yes, I have and I do, because I think being Jewish is, I don't want to prevent someone who sincerely wants to practice Judaism and be involved in our community because their partner is making a different choice. Now, I have had a family come where the mother wanted to be Jewish, former Soviet Union family, by the way. The mother wanted to be Jewish, the father did not, and she wanted me to secretly convert the 3 daughters. No, right? Like this has to be something that your family agrees with. But when I'm dealing with a competent adult who says, I want to be part of Judaism and my partner is respectful of this, then I don't want to punish them or prevent them from being Jewish because their partner actively practices another faith. We have a lot of conversations about how will you make this work and how will it impact your relationship. But in the end, I think it is their decision to make.
Did you want to add anything, Rabbi Vila?
This worries me not so much because of the partner being practicing another religion, but because of the children that they may have. Because when you have 2 people who have no kids, each one can do their own thing and somehow work it out. But when you have children, you have to transmit a much clearer message. And I don't think it really works to say they will be both and they will pick their way when they're older, they choose when they're older. So that's what worries me. I don't think it can really be a Jewish home when each one of them practices a different religion. If you have one that is, was born Christian but doesn't observe anything, maybe you can work it out. But if they're both practicing different religions, I find it very difficult. I don't understand how it works.
You just brought back a memory. In my Sunday school class in the 8th grade, we studied other religions. And part of that was taking a field trip to different houses of worship. And when we went to a Catholic church, one of my classmates broke down crying because she had Catholic father, Jewish mother, and they had been raising her in both faiths. And she said, I just wish they hadn't left it up to me. I find this really confusing.
Mm-hmm. Very true. I actually saw one of my former students the other day who converted to Judaism, and because she was going into a marriage and she divorced that person and she remarried, and she's married to someone who's not Jewish now, but she's still observing Judaism and stands loud and proud that she's Jewish. So it's difficult, but you know what? When people come to Judaism, they come to it and they get hooked. Thank God. They're addicted to it. I mean, not addicted, but we love our Judaism. I know the answer to this question, but I want to ask you because Rabbi Vila may have another insight into it. Margie Miller asked if there's no mikveh at the conservative yeshiva or at the Schechter Institute. There isn't, no. Right?
There is a place that was prepared at the conservative yeshiva and the future center for a mikveh, but they never built it. They have a place prepared for it, and they never built it. Schechter doesn't have it though at all.
I'm going to ask my daughter to go investigate as she as she's on her Nativ program this year at the Fuchsberg Institute.
I understand that it's a very expensive thing to do. And so they just have the space, but they never did it.
Interesting that they have the space. I know at our time when I was at JTS, we always had a discussion about that. Debbie Green asked, and I'm going to ask you 2 questions at the same time so we can move along. Debbie Green asked, how does one prove that one's mother or maternal grandmother is Jewish? And then we had another question from Marilyn Cohen, who asked if, how did the COVID restrictions affect conversions these past years? Yeah, it's years.
Well, we can ask to see a ketubah or a tombstone, or if the mother is alive, to hear her explain either how her conversion process happened or where her Jewish family is from and how long they've been practicing. So those are all ways to prove that someone's Jewish, at least for the purposes of a conversion through me. I would imagine that the paperwork's more important, though, in Israel. Am I right, Rabbi Via?
What happens here is that you have all of these Russians, some of them are really Jewish, but they can't prove it. There's an organization by Rabbi Seth Farber, who's a modern Orthodox rabbi, Musmach of Yeshiva University, called Itim, and they are excellent at finding, going to take pictures of the cemetery in the Ukraine or finding old papers or all kinds of things. They really are excellent helping people from the former Soviet Union, show the proof. It's sometimes difficult when you have no papers. Sometimes it's one of my student who's teaching in the Nativ program. She told me that some of her students who are taking the conversion course are doing it in the army because they can't prove their Judaism, not because they're not Jewish. So I guess sometimes it's really difficult because you don't have the papers, or they got lost, or whoever was alive at the time of the conversion already passed away. Sometimes it can be really difficult.
So a couple of weeks ago, we did a Brit Milah for a baby. Mom and dad are both Jewish. Dad's side of the family is from the former Soviet Union. And I asked his aunt, do you have sons? She said, I do. I said, do you remember their Brit? And she said, well, no, because we didn't move here until they were much older. And she said, this is the first Brit Milah in our family for a baby. And there's a lot of joy that we can simply gather in someone's living room with a moil and have a Brit Milah. And it was a very moving time. The question about COVID has definitely changed how we practice Brit Milah. Even our very Orthodox traditional Moil Rabbi Shaul, he has allowed people to witness through Zoom, and it's just him and mom and dad to protect the health of the child. But it's Texas, so we're a little more relaxed about COVID protocols, and so now it's pretty much back to the ordinary, having a minyan present and even full on parties and celebrations.
I don't really know. I didn't think of asking that. We are in a much better situation than most of the world anyway. We have more than 2/3 of the population vaccinated, more than 40% with 3 shots already. So we're doing much better than most places. But I really don't know how much it made a difference. I'm sure they had to be more careful, but I don't know.
So we have a few more questions, a number actually. One question was, Rabbi Zelony, we have a few for you. One question is, when you convert one person in a couple to Judaism, do you bring the non-Jewish partner into the discussion where there are already children involved? And another question was one of your first questions that you had as you were actually speaking. Someone was interested in the exact wording that you used I want to see how she worded it. Okay, can you repeat the sentence starting with a unique, when you started telling candidates that they're more traditional Jews who may not accept their conservative conversions?
I said that Masorti Judaism is a unique and authentic way to practice Judaism, and that if you study with me and you find it resonates with you, then you should convert through the Masorti movement. And if later in life you become more traditional, you can convert again. And if you study with me and you discover that you're either less religious, you don't think you're a halacha, that you want to follow some form or interpretation of halacha, I'd be happy to introduce you to Reform colleagues. And if you find you're more religious, I'd be happy to introduce you to some of my Orthodox colleagues. But I had a couple come to me. He was Jewish, she wasn't. They had moved to the area. They had been going to Chabad in the previous state for years, and they wanted me to do the conversion. And I said, why don't you convert through Chabad? Aren't you involved here? Yes, we are, but they want us to move into the Eruv and keep kosher, and we don't want to do that. I said, I'm sorry, I am not the right rabbi for you, right? You figure it out, right? But I forgot your other question, Ellen. I'm sorry, the first one you asked.
If you speak to when the situation takes place, if their children are ready.
Yes, and we have conversations about what will this be like for your children? And how are you going to handle it? And we do run into some complexities. This was not a conversion I created, but we have a family who wanted, mom is not Jewish, dad is. Boys are already circumcised, and when they circumcised them, they didn't do a full-blown conversion, but they said, listen, someday we'll want the boys to become Jewish, and so it's our intention that this circumcision will count for conversion someday. Well, they still have not gone through the formal process, and mom is just, for some reason, very anxious about taking them to the mikveh. And we're getting the little one is going into the 4th grade next year, which is when we give a date for the bar mitzvah. And we've been telling the family since the beginning, we really can't give you a bar mitzvah date or start training for a bar mitzvah until your family is ready to do this as a family. So it's not always simple. However, there are some who say, well, why do you let that boy in the Sunday school? He's not Jewish. And I say, well, what advantage would there be to telling this family who is interested in educating their children about Judaism that they can't attend Sunday school?
It's very complex.
It is.
I want to thank everyone for their very thoughtful questions and thought-provoking questions. So here are a few more. And I hope people don't mind. I want to give you credit for who's asking the questions. So I'm telling everyone who is asking. So Naomi Gretz said, what happens if someone considers themselves to be Jewish because they have a Reform background, which recognizes patrilineal descent? Do they have to convert? And then I'm going to try to give you another one too, because Lisa Kadosh followed up. I said, this occurred about 25 years ago when I lived in Israel and a friend of mine moved there. We came from a very Jewish and close-knit community in Cleveland. My friend, who was born and raised as a Jew, met a person in Israel and the idea of marriage came up. My friend found out her mom was a convert and not Orthodox, so she was told she needed a tikkun. It was like semantics, not conversion, but it would last 3 years. She was definitely offended. The boyfriend was told he can date a non-Jew, and she was told she needed to stay away from him because how she can be with someone who dates a non-Jew, and she had to live an Orthodox life. But they were two souls that met, and eventually they broke up when she was deeply offended and left Israel and questioned her life. Still involved with Judaism, but says if she marries a non-Jew now, it's not really intermarriage. Is there a solution? Can she ultimately fit into the structure and religion that she grew up with?
I'm not sure I followed the whole story.
I didn't either, but I think it was because her mother had a conversion and it was a non-Orthodox conversion. And that was the situation that we were discussing, that often it's not accepted as if it's a non-Orthodox conversion. So, the other question that Naomi had asked was about the patrilineal descent, which I would say, yes, the person still needs to at least go to mikveh.
Yes.
But you guys can answer.
Yes, I agree with that statement. I have one in my community who is of patrilineal descent, and we have a deal. He does not, his issue is he doesn't want to do Hatafat Dam Brit. I get it. And so he says, I won't say yes to an aliyah. I won't confuse the community. And I say, you're always welcome to come and be with us.
It could be a difficulty. Another comment was Debbie Green wrote, I know of babies born during COVID whose circumcision was done at the hospital prior to the 8th day. That was just a comment. And Kathy Swerdlow, having your proof accepted by the Rabbanut is a problem even for non-converts. Yeah, I had ketuvot from my marriage, my mother and my grandmothers, and the Rabbanut would not accept them because they couldn't verify that the rabbis who performed the ceremonies were Orthodox. So I've heard of that situation too. Karen and Isabel, if you can unmute Rabbi Vila, that would be great. She can't unmute,
It's
unfortunately.
okay. It's
Oh,
okay.
Yofi, Yofi, okay. And then Julia Loeb asked, are there conversions for Ethiopian Jews?
Oh, that's much easier. That the Rabbi Ovadia Yosef had decided they were all Jewish. There was a time then they used to require them, but mostly now it's much easier. And if it's required, it's an easier conversion than for other olim than the ones for the Ethiopian Jews.
Interesting. I never knew that. And Marjorie asked, are baptized children of a Jewish mother considered halakhically Jewish, or would they have to convert to Judaism? And Avis Miller just wanted to write, she wrote an FYI, with patrilineals and Zera Yisrael, which if one of you can explain that, I use the expression affirming Jewish status rather than conversion.
Yeah. But we never answered the question about the woman who left Israel because her mother had converted, but not through the Orthodox movement.
Right.
Did you want to address that at all, Rabbi Via?
Which woman?
That she had come to Israel and was told she couldn't get married because
I don't remember exactly the case, but you can't get married in the rabbinate if the rabbinate does not recognize the conversion or the mother's conversion. So that can be very frustrating. And I think it is, if I recall correctly, it's also a case of former Soviet Union. And these are people who feel Jewish and yet they're not halakhically Jewish. So actually the rabbinate could have made things so much easier if they would have just taken a more flexible approach to what it means that you accept the commandments. After all, you don't have to be conservative or reform to accept a more flexible interpretation of what that means.
I also think there's an element that bothers me, that I do expect my converts to be keeping kashrut on some level, and Shabbat on some level, and Talmud Torah, and tzedakah, living a Jewish life. But I don't expect them to hold a higher standard than the rest of my community. And there's something to me that would be disingenuous about a conversion process where I forced a person to say something they didn't really believe or mean. And I wonder, these candidates that are forced to go through the Rabbanut, is there an element of converting where they have to lie about who they are?
Well,
and what does that mean on a spiritual level?
I think that some people who go to beyn know that if they don't somewhat lie, they're not going to get through it. And that's
right.
Really a horrible experience, because you're one that's supposed to be going through something spiritual. And you know that if you say everything that you really believe in, you're not going to get through the beyn.
That makes me feel sad. Although I would definitely counsel them to lie.
For practical purposes.
There's a related question to this from Lorna Zeffler. This is for Rabbi Diana. Could you please speak briefly about the problem that exists in Israel, that they demand an Orthodox lifestyle from the converts and have retracted conversions from those who don't, and how this dissuades many potential conversions?
Yeah, this is really terrible, because according to all the sources, just like you can't annul a divorce once it's given, you can't annul a conversion once it's over. But they've done that. There was a famous case in Ashdod many years ago, where they went to the head of the Orthodox beyn there for a divorce, and the man and the rabbi realized that this woman is a convert, so he started asking her questions about her observance, and she said this was not relevant. They were coming here for a divorce, and he said he would not take care of her divorce case if she didn't answer his questions. So he ended up deciding that because she wasn't really observant, then her marriage was not valid and she doesn't require a divorce at all. And she put even her biologically Jewish husband on a list of people who have a questionable kind of Judaism, as well as her children. And it was a real problem. And they went and they appealed to the higher rabbinic court, and then they appealed to the Supreme Court in Israel. And the Supreme Court in Israel usually does not want to get involved with this kind of issues. So they just told the rabbinic court, solve your own mess. So the solution was to move the divorce case from Ashdod to Tel Aviv, have another court declare that the couple is divorced, remove the husband from the problematic list and the kids and all the rest of it. But they never solved the issue in principle about allowing to annul divorces or annul, in this case, annul conversion, which is something that you should not do at all according to Jewish law. And they do things like that. They annul divorces and they annul conversions, even though it's very clear in the sources that once you finish it, it's final and you're not supposed to do it. But since they're the highest religious authority, it's a very problematic issue. And the Supreme Court can override the Supreme Rabbinic Court, but they rarely ever do that because they don't want to have problems with the ultra-Orthodox. So,
wow. I did have 3 more questions here in addition to what you had, Rabbi Sella. One was regarding acceptance of conservative Masorti conversion by the Orthodox streams. This is from Barbara Greenberg. Do the Orthodox specific concerns about the conversion process, or is it more of a general lack of acceptance of rulings by conservative rabbis?
I think I've given some good examples why an Orthodox rabbi might be concerned, right? The fact that I would do a conversion for a family where one partner is Jewish and one partner is not, I understand why that does not work for an Orthodox rabbi, and I can see why they would say, I can't accept Masorti conversions if this sort of thing is going on.
Did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to say that it's not always a question of what our halachic position is, but they don't recognize us as rabbis to begin with. Therefore, very often you have responsa like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and others, where they say the beyn is invalid. Therefore, whatever it is that they do is invalid, notwithstanding whether it's a more traditional or more right-wing conservative rabbi or not, because they don't recognize their authority to convert.
Does
Thank
it make
you.
a difference if the converting rabbi is a woman as opposed to a man?
Probably worse, because they don't recognize the ultra-Orthodox, do not recognize women rabbis. Also, only the very liberal Orthodox have women rabbis, and they always have a glass ceiling of certain things they can still not do, even if they're considered rabbis.
So Cheryl asks, will you convert a baby born to a non-Jewish mother but Jewish father when they intend to raise the child Jewish? I'm reading all these questions, so.
Yeah. And I often find the non-Jewish partner is the one who makes challah on Friday and drives the kid to Sunday school, so.
Yep, so true. And then we had another question, which I'm trying to read here. Okay, Claire asks, do you think we could expect the Orthodox Rabbinut more flexible in the future to open all those people they actually reject? Halavai, right?
Orthodox Rabbanut where, in Israel?
I would think so.
As long as we, well, this is the first government in a while that doesn't have the ultra-Orthodox in the coalition. But normally, most of the coalitions require the votes of the Orthodox parties in order to have a majority. And therefore, even if they're a minority, they have a lot of clout, because if you don't have their votes, then you don't have a majority in parliament. So this government, which is a very weird coalition from Arabs to Orthodox, is trying to make some changes. Also, as far as Orthodox, as the conversion and all kind of other issues. But in 2 years they may be gone, and we'll be back in the same situation where you need the ultra-Orthodox to have a government, and that's why in the long run, nothing really changes. A few years back, for 2 years, we had a government without ultra-Orthodox parties, and it didn't last. So I don't know how long this one will last.
You know, if the prophets tell us that someday each person will sit under their own fig tree with their own grapevine, why not the Rabbanut becoming more flexible? Let's be optimistic.
Yeah.
Well, there used to be much more open-minded.
But it could happen again.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like it. They get more and more extreme. Even the Sephardi rabbis that used to be more open-minded would say, "Hem ishtaknezu." They go to Ashkenazi yeshivot and they become more and more close-like.
That's a term I never knew. I like that. Well, I don't know if I like it, but it's a new term for me. And Marion Tully wrote, "Why are they so hard when we all accepted our first convert, Ruth?" Words of wisdom from our matriarch there. So true. And Rabbi Stella, I believe you had 2 more questions from Barbara
Yes.
Finkel. Was that
Yes,
right?
there are 2 questions from Barbara Finkel. The first is, do people who have been converted in the US by conservative rabbis have an easier time going through conversion in Israel than those who haven't converted at all outside of Israel? And, actually 3 questions. She also asked, is there a specific order to the 3 steps that are required for conversion? And what are the ramifications of getting married outside the rabbinate?
The order is starting with circumcision that has to be completely cured before you can immerse in the mikvah, and at the end is the beyn. That's the official order, even though the decisors discuss, b'diavad if it works in another way, but that's supposed to be the standard way. I know people who come to Israel and do a second conversion just so that it will be officially recognized. I guess for them, it may be easier because they already know a lot of the stuff instead of starting from scratch, but I'm not sure in practice it makes much difference or not. I don't know.
Rabbi Zelony?
I think those questions were more about dealing with the Rabbanut, no?
Pretty much, but I'm sure you may have had some of your converts who moved to Israel or thought about moving to Israel.
No, actually.
Okay, all right. Do
There
we
was
have any
one
more questions?
Other question. I'm trying to find how that was worded, but it was about about a baptized child or baptized mother.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
There was a question regarding the child of a baptized Jewish woman, if he or she is considered Jewish or he or she requires conversion.
A baptized Jewish woman?
No, the woman. The
No,
mother
I
is
think it was a
probably
question
Jewish.
about the baby.
Yeah.
Here it is. I got it. This is from Marjorie Buxbaum. Are baptized children of a Jewish mother considered halachically Jewish, or would they have to convert to Judaism?
So mom had become Christian and had her children baptized, but we consider her Jewish because she was born Jewish. I'd have to look that one up. Do you know, Rabbi Via?
I think strictly they are Jewish, but you may want to have some kind of a process to show that they came back in a way to Judaism. That's very often what we do. There's some sort of ceremonies like that also in the Morederet for people who come back. So maybe just symbolically you would immerse the child to say that, they're going back. I don't think strictly speaking it's required, but it may be a way to mark.
Ritualize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So apparently the mom's Jewish and the kids were raised Catholic.
Yeah, so that's why they may even need it themselves to show that they're changing, they're doing some kind of a process.
Years ago, there was a rabbi in our community, an RA rabbi, who suggested that before B'nai Mitzvah, there should be a mikvah process for the children, so that even if there's a doubt on their status, that the children would go and have a mikvah ceremony before they had their bar bat mitzvah. It never necessarily took off. It's a nice spiritual cleansing to show the transition and that liminal moment of what takes place. It's also easy if you have a mikvah available. You don't always have that. And I believe those were all the questions that I had. There was one more comment that my mother actually wrote, that sometimes if people need to show proof of their their marriage to make aliyah and the rabbi is deceased who signed the ketubah, that's often a problem. So when my father was president of the synagogue, they asked him to give the proof that because the rabbi had been deceased from there. But there are many, I think it teaches us we all need to keep our records very well.
Don't lose your ketubah.
Mine's on the wall, so if my kids ever want to make aliyah, I'm going to have to take the whole thing down, glass and all.
Yeah, but a conservative ketubah is no proof of Judaism as far as the rabbinate. You can use it for the Misrat Apnim, but you can for the
Actually, that's something I tell couples when they're getting married, because we now offer different sorts of ketubahs. And I say you might want to think about using the most traditional language and having 2 male witnesses in case you ever want to use this, but then put whatever you want that's beautiful on your wall and put your actual ketubah in the safe deposit box.
And as Rabbi Naomi Gretz, I remember when this happened, even Orthodox rabbis in the States can be on the blacklist and not recognized. So
I tell them that too.
yeah.
Okay, well, we are just about at our hour and a half mark, and this has been a wonderful discussion, a very, very stimulating discussion, and obviously one that we could go on for a very long time. It's a topic which we all are interested in, and we all can point to people that we know that we are related to, or we are friendly with, or people in our congregations that we know have come to Judaism through conversion. For myself, this is a topic which is, of course, near and dear to my heart. Having come to Judaism almost 40 years ago now, together with my husband and my 2 children who were very young at the time. They were 4 years old and 13 months old. We all went into the waters of the Long Island Sound. That was our mikveh, and never looked back. And of course, some of you may be thinking, well, that it's very unusual to find someone who is a convert that has the title rabbi in front of their name. And I have to tell you, I belong to a Facebook group which is for rabbis who are converts. And you would be surprised how many of us are in this group. It's not as uncommon as one might think. And I'm very happy and proud to be a member of that group. So Rabbi Wollensfield, did you have something you wanted to announce? And then I'll wrap up.
Our next program, I thought you were going to announce that part, and I was going to piggyback on that. So you announce the next program, and then I'll piggyback on that part.
Okay, all right, okay. Yes, so this is the first of 3 programs that we are doing through the grant. The second one is going to be on November 14th, and the third on December 12th. So 4 weeks from today, on November 14th, on the same time, on Sunday afternoon here in the States, 1 o'clock Eastern time, which of course is still 8 o'clock Israel time. And I think South America it's
Changes.
2 o'clock. 2 o'clock there.
South America is going to change to 3 o'clock.
Oh, okay. I see. It's good that we have you here to answer that question.
And will
And I
Israel's
don't
time
know-
be different too? I think Israel might change.
No, because
also.
they don't. We change on October 31st, and you change on the 7th. So by the time the 14th comes around, we're at the same page again.
Yelfi. Okay.
Right. And the only thing I don't know is Australia, I think, will be sometime in the wee hours of the morning. But in any event, it's the same time as this program was. So the topic of that workshop is going to be davening as conservative Jewish women. And we are specifically going to explore the Women of the Wall experience and the egalitarian experience of davening at Robinson's Arch. The 2 speakers that day will be Rabbi Deborah Cantor from Connecticut and Rakefet Ginsburg, the executive director of the Masorti movement in Israel. It should be just like this one, a very informative and exciting program. If you have not signed up for it yet, I encourage you all to sign up. You need to register for each workshop individually. And if you enjoyed today's program, please encourage your friends who did not sign up to sign up and participate. And all of these programs are being recorded. Once the recording is made available, all those who registered for the program will get an email with a link to the recording. So that's our next program. And now I think Rabbi Ellen has something to add to that.
Yes. So our connection to Israel is most important to all of us. All of our members of the board of directors of Women's League for Conservative Judaism are members of Merkaz. And we also have a Torah Fund event coming up that is on October 25th about Israel. And you can check your Women's League week about that. And just the way that our women in Israel have the opportunity to pray with Women of the Wall each month, we have a number of activities with Women of the Wall as well. Women's League has partnered with Women of the Wall to help us understand how Women of the Wall fight for all Jewish women to be heard. So we can learn about these modern day Western Wall liberators who help all women understand the strength and goals of determined Jewish women. So join us on Sunday, January 30th at noon Eastern Time to hear Yochi Rappaport, the Executive Director of Women of the Wall, and a young participant of the Rosh Chodesh Torah service. Hopefully her schedule works, or else she's going to be recorded, my daughter Cameron, to tell us about their Women of the Wall experience, what that's all about. And at that program on January 30th, we have the Executive Director of Women of the Wall. On the program on November 14th, we're going to have people who have participated. Rabbi Cantor participated there. So we want all women to be able to pray at the wall. So help us for all women to be able to pray and daven freely at the Kotel. So it's really wonderful that although many of us at this moment cannot travel to Israel, we have a number of different opportunities to further our connection and our kesher, our relationship with Israel, with these many different programs that we have from different perspectives as well. Because as our president often says, we have vanilla and chocolate, but you know what? We need a swirl too, because we're not just black and white. We're not just chocolate and vanilla. We're all of it. And we get to see different perspectives, which is really just wonderful to be able to do. So Rabbi Sela, Toda Rabbah for organizing this. To my colleagues, thank you for being our speakers today as well.
Thank you, Rabbi Zelony and Rabbi Bila, for your participation was wonderful.
Thank you.
Bye,
Shavua
everybody.
tov to everyone.
Shavua tov.
Shavua tov.
Shavua tov. Thank you all for participating and being with us.
Bye.